Jonathan Wilson is my guest on Future Cities Africa today. He is Urban Data Project Manager at the South African Cities Network. Jonathan, welcome. Let's start with your background and your current role at the South African Cities Network.
Hi, Dan. So I actually have a background in sort of urban planning and design, but I've recently ended up at the South African Cities Network, where I'm the project manager, as you mentioned, for the urban data projects. And what really this role comprises of is sort of twofold focus. The first is analyzing and digitizing city data and performance that we sort of do on the different cities of the South African Cities Network. But mostly and increasingly what this role comprises of is assisting our city members, South African Cities Network, to proactively use data to drive evidence-based decision-making. I suppose this is what we'll get into a bit during the session.
Can you give me an overview of the Smart Cities paper series and its objectives? I know that it's a recent collaborative report that you've done at the South African Cities Network. What are some of the key elements of that program? And can you also maybe inform us of how you are looking at inspiring action on this report?
As I'm sure you'll know, you'll be probably quite an expert in smart cities after all the interviews you've been doing. But there's been a lot of hype ever since, or a lot of hype for a while, but ever since last year's State of the Nation address, there's been a lot of hype around smart cities and what does this mean and what do we do about this and how do we fit in as the private sector, the public sector, who's doing what, etc. But I think what's common and what we've definitely noticed is there's a real lack of a common understanding between who does what and which parties do what. So the South African Cities Network does have a pre-existing smart cities program, and there was pre-existing work, but we just felt that with more requests that were coming out, everyone cities trying to make sense of what's happening, we thought it would be good to do a paper series. And the paper series is really what we do when we know that we're not experts in that particular field, but try to get the collective knowledge about who's doing what in the space and what is possible. So this is what the paper series does. It draws on the collective knowledge of urban researchers on innovation practices within our participating cities and tries to give us understanding of how we can begin to inform smart city solutions that are sort of built and designed for South African cities. So the first paper series that we've done, which is going to be released very soon, I hope, looked at smart governance, which is one of the many components of smart cities, be it smart environments, smart mobility, etc. We defined smart governance as the ability for government to make decisions through a combination of ICT-based tools and collaborative governance that really allows the public sector to achieve their developmental mandates. And I suppose there are quite a few reasons for choosing smart governance. The first really and the most glaring was that it aligns with our 2021 State of City report, which is sort of South African Cities Network's flagship report, presenting and collecting sort of a body of research on the previous 5 years of what's happened in our cities and what sort of manifested and what are the challenges or the successes. And this new one that'll be released towards the middle of next year is focusing on governance and focusing on the systemic underlying governance issues that we face in our cities, that are real challenges to development, and really trying to unpack what this is and what we can do about it. So this was a sort of opportunity to look at, considering that we unpacking governance in terms of sustainability, finance, the built environment, economic development, safety, etc., inclusivity, what is happening in terms of innovation, in terms of technology, and in terms of data, so we can try and overcome some of these problems. The second reason, and I suppose another obvious one, was that just smart governance and the principles of it really align with the urban data projects that I work on. So it was a chance to sort of align what we're already doing with these requests that we're getting from cities of what is smart cities, what do we do about it? And I think the reason again for choosing smart governance is that we've come to believe is kind of like a foundational base point from which to learn and launch smart city solutions. Like I said, there's so much out there. There's smart metering, there's remote sensing, there's all this stuff that cities are aware of and cities almost are being pushed onto them, but sort of believe that you can't talk about metering, IoT, big data, whatever, if you just simply can't manage the data within your city, and you can't use that data that you have and harness to drive evidence-based decision making. So that's really what we try to achieve with the paper series. How we aim to inspire action really is through collecting these as a series of learnings that can be put in a repository for our cities and whoever else wants to see it, to start to see who's doing what and what's out there. I mean, I know that there is in development a sort of national framework for smart cities. It's not really in SACN's nature to sort of be coming up with frameworks and sort of mandating cities to sort of follow them, although there is IUDF. But really where the South African Cities Network is good at is sort of being a place for knowledge exchange and best practices and pooling of knowledge to try and assist our cities with what's going and what's happening. So that's really what we're trying to do and what we try to do with this initial paper series. And I suppose the next steps beyond dissemination would be, okay, well, what do we look at next? What's the biggest issue there?
It's very exciting, this project. What is your specific definition of a smart city? What does a smart city mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a tough one. I don't think anyone has the answer. I mean, for me personally, it's probably using technology to create efficiencies within our cities to achieve their developmental needs. I know there's a lot of people who will say that smart doesn't necessarily mean technology, and I suppose I would believe them, but me personally, I feel smart cities in the way we're talking about now is really about how do we use technology and data and innovation to sort of better improve on cities and people's lives. Really, I think that's the key, is improving citizens' lives within cities.
So you've mentioned allowing municipalities in informing evidence-based decision-making. How is and why is open data so important for municipalities?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what we've seen now really shows the importance of data and using science and evidence to inform decision-making. The challenge that we find within cities is that cities don't necessarily know. We say it a lot, evidence-based decision-making, but cities don't know what it is. They'll say, I mean, we hear this in engagements that we have, sort of what is evidence-based decision-making. I think there is actually a book on it, but that's besides the point. So what we try focusing is just trying to get cities to use their data and to harness what they have. This is for many reasons. Sort of if you look at cities themselves, they collect large amounts of data and they are required to report to national departments, be it Treasury or whoever. But what we find really is that this is a one-way relationship where often the data is going into Treasury for reporting purposes, but it's not sort of coming back to be used to sort of make decisions and inform policies. And within that, there's also very little ability to sort of benchmark against other cities and see how you can grow. And so there's many challenges within cities that we're trying to overcome. This is also to mention the fact that in a lot of cities, the sort of management of data and the data maturity is quite low. And cities aren't really understanding the importance of using data. Not to say that they don't, and there are cities, and I'm sure we'll chat about this later, pockets of excellence across cities. But I think, and this is something that my colleague spoke to me about last week, it speaks to the governance. Cities are becoming increasingly high-pressured environments, and decision makers are having to make decisions very quickly. And often this is at the absence of evidence. So it's a big challenge, and it's something that we have to sort of work towards figuring out how do we best resolve this, and how do we get cities to use data in ways that positively impact policies, so that policies aren't sort of misguided, misdirected, sort of based on really a lack of evidence that isn't perhaps happening within cities.
You mentioned quite a few challenges. So if you had a magic wand and you could just change some legislation or change something that would solve your challenges, what would that look like? How would you solve it?
That's a complex question. I mean, if I could change something, it's just really the biggest thing that I see a lot and what we struggle with is sort of internal capacity to use data. The sort of expertise often that's in cities isn't really geared and built up to be using data to inform decision making. And what we get then a lot of the time is tech companies, private sector companies selling cities products, so selling them as sort of solutions to all their challenges. But a lot of that is often quite predatory, and it relies then on sort of locking themselves in to continue receiving payments, to continue to do the work, and then the cities never become capacitated to do that work themselves. And that's something that we try to sort of solve with the work that we're doing, is to really not only, for example, help cities build data portals, but also help them build the capacity to be able to do this in-house. So we sort of help them along the journey in a way that at the end point, we don't have to be there and our partners don't have to be there. It's the cities themselves who are able to do that work. And I just think that's more sustainable in the long term as well. Although, I mean, I will say there are obviously a lot of good expertise in some of these big tech companies, which we mustn't shy away from and neglect completely.
From my conversations that I've been having, I hear a lot about siloed operations, and the opposite of open data would be closed data and departments not sharing data with each other. Do you think people are not seeing the use case for open data? And with regards to public and private sector sharing data, private sector is perhaps not seeing the business case at this stage. How do you propose we look into solving that?
It's a big challenge. Something that we notice a lot, really, and I can't speak much for the private sector case, but definitely in our cities, is the general fear of data. I think departments or cities are worried that if they share their data, it's going to be used in an almost malicious fashion, as almost against them. Well, we can see that you've only done X, Y, and Z. So the value there of sharing is not often seen, just due to a general fear of the unknown. So it is something that we need to try and overcome. It is, I mean, we've seen certain cities who have done that, and it's great. It's great, some of the work that they've been doing. But you also get, and I'm sure you'll know, you get a lot of problems with departments that just don't share between themselves. For example, you'll get one department that'll be looking for a certain indicator to base their planning, won't be aware that that's collected in Department B, and will then go out and buy that from a private data vendor, which is not to say that data vendors aren't useful, but if Department B is paying for it already, it's just almost efficiencies and cost effectiveness that we can create purely by just breaking down these barriers that we see in cities. And I think this is going to take time for sort of organizations like ourselves, the South African Cities Network, to map what is happening within cities, what data is collected where, what reporting requirements are there, are these loops being closed? But you're also going to need, from a city side, sort of institutional change to proactively break down these silos, and just political will to allow those who are within cities to be able to do the positive work that we want to see. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Let's talk about the CDFC. Can you expand a bit more on the Common Data Framework for Cities?
The Common Data Framework for Cities is really what the South African Cities Network is doing to try and help cities proactively use data to inform decision making. This sort of comprises of about 4 or 5 main components. The first one is SCODA, which is the South African Cities Open Data Almanac, which we develop in partnership with Open Cities Lab, who are doing lots of great work across lots of cities in the country and lots of other projects. I'm sure you've definitely heard about the work that they're doing. And what SCODA is really is a central repository for data. And it started off as a way to sort of pool and collect South African Cities Network data in the 2016 Set of Cities report. But since then, what it's become is a product that we offer to cities to make their own, to adopt and to use as their own central data repository. This has been done really successfully in eThekwini with Edge.Durban, which you may have seen. And we've actually started this journey now with 2 new cities. So besides for that, the second component we have in the Common Data Framework for Cities is the codebook. And the codebook really, I mean, we've done phase 1 and there's still lots of work to go, but the codebook as it is a sort of common, collection of indicators that cities are required to report on with their sort of definitions, their methodologies for collection, and sort of an indication of data availability within cities. So we're speaking about silos. And what this tries to do is try to break that down. And the next phase that we wanted to go on is sort of choose one city or a few cities and really start to look at the different departments and start to see what data exists within just different departments. And then hopefully with the help of that particular city, start to centralize this. And put it on SCODA or put it on the city's own data repository. So if you're a practitioner working in a city and you want to find out, I don't know how many housing developments have been built in integration zones, you would be able to look on a repository and see, oh, well, that's actually captured within the Human Settlements Department, and start to break down these silos that we were speaking of earlier. The third component then is the South African Council for City Data. This is a project that we do in collaboration with National Treasury City Support Program. And what this is sort of an assembly for city data champions to come together to exchange work that they've done, exchange best practices, knowledge and learnings. And yeah, really just a form of engagement to discuss challenges and issues and successes. And I think it's quite unique. I mean, in terms of just focusing around data for decision making, I don't think there's anything else for the cities in the country. And we've had a lot of really cool discussions and events with our city members over the past year. It's been great to see what cities have been able to do, and what's been the best to see is practitioners from different cities starting to build connections with each other and sort of start to email and phone each other and say, oh, I like how you did that. How could we do it in our city? And then the last component, which is sort of a byproduct of all of these, but it's really just trying to build capacity within cities. Like I said, like I keep saying, to proactively use the data that they have. And this is something that we sort of do through the 3 components that I just mentioned. So yeah, that's the CDFC.
What are some of the success stories in South Africa so far? You mentioned eThekwini. I think you also mentioned that City of Tshwane and City of Cape Town are also adopting open data policies. Can you maybe elaborate on some of these projects and what other cities can potentially learn from them?
I mean, the City of Cape Town gets a lot of stick, perhaps rightfully so, perhaps not. But the one thing that they definitely seem to be getting right is data. And to my mind, they're the only city in the country that has an almost dedicated data and analytics team. And I think they're doing really great work. But I think in a way, what sort of helped Cape Town get this far really has been the water crisis. We saw them there champion the use of data to drive sort of decision-making and policy intervention, communicate with citizens through data portals and dashboards and stuff like that. And I think that has allowed them to sort of move from there to start at a pretty good base point. Then there's obviously the work that I mentioned with Etiquini, with Edge and Open Cities Lab. And what we've seen there, again, with a city that already has the infrastructure in place, the sort of digital infrastructure to collect data and to share data, it's allowed them to act really quickly to source sort of information from their citizens and their businesses, and also impact sort of economic recovery plans. And the work that they've been doing there within the Economic Development Department has been well praised by the World Bank. Recommend you, if you haven't already seen it, to go into edge.durban. There's some really cool portal and great work, like I said, by the Edge and OCL teams. And they've also found a way there to sort of not just have a data repository and not just be something that can be used by people who are data literate, but also a way to, be it through data stories or tools, interactive tools, to communicate with citizens and businesses in the COVID case about sort of economic relief and financial relief, but also just in terms of the data that's coming out of that particular department. So yeah, that's been great. You mentioned Swane. I know that they're doing work with CSP. I think also on Open Data Portal. I'm not personally involved in that project, but it's great to hear about that. And I think what we're seeing is that cities are starting to understand what's happening. I mean, we've just recently started working with a great team at Ekurhuleni. We're also working with City of Johannesburg. And we've got other cities like Nelson Mandela Bay Metro we haven't started working with them, but they're starting to see the value. And I think, unfortunately, it's been quite slow. But I think with sort of constant work, a sort of community of practice and pooling resources and knowledge, I think we're starting to see some progress. And we are seeing some good work. So it's nice.
The smaller local municipalities, is there a case for them to also be learning from the bigger cities? Because you've mentioned quite a few big cities, but I do know there are smaller cities as well. They should also be able to benefit from an open data framework.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is sort of something that, I stand to be corrected, but I think the new district development model is something that tries to deal with this. And I recently had a chat with an international development agency who has been mandated and given funding to start to work with small municipalities to get central data repositories. I mean, I don't think that this is something that should be limited to the bigger cities or the cities. I definitely think that all municipalities can begin to use and collect data more efficiently. And it would be great to sort of start to see how some of our colleagues like SELGA or international development agencies are starting to assist municipalities to do some of the work that we're seeing in the Cape Towns and Etigrinis.
If I gave you a time machine and I told you you're in 2040, what would our cities be like then? What kind of technologies do you see that would have emerged? What would quality of life be like? Or what are your hopes? What do you want to see?
I don't want to be too sensationalist, but I think we can either go two ways. The way I hope we don't go is what we do see in certain cities and definitely internationally is sort of, like I said, sort of predatory private sector companies selling smart city branded solutions that are labeled as a challenge to all cities' problems. But in reality, what you're seeing is, like I said, building a reliance and also just accessing public data for profiteering. The fear there with stuff like that and projects like that, especially in South Africa, is that there you see smart technology and innovation can start to be used to sort of deepen inequality and exclusion. I think when you drive into Waterfall City and you see Mr. President, he has the first smart city in the country, it's quite worrying if that's the way smart cities are being branded, because really that's about private security companies. Again, I stand to be corrected. But the efficiency there we're really seeing is about privatization, exclusion, and profiteering. So that is a worry. I mean, I hope, again, don't want to be too sensational, but I mean, I hope we would see a more lighter side of that. I hope in 20 years we would start to see cities sort of take action and really control their own smart and data driven agendas, and really use technology to democratically place citizens at the center, and go beyond just sort of information dissemination and to sort of actively collaborate and participate with citizens to collectively sort of delivering cities that are better for all to live in. And I mean, I think we've seen that in cities overseas, like Barcelona has been really great in sort of having a citizen-centric model to data and smartness, if you will, and sort of really driven active participatory citizenship. So that I think is a great example to follow. I do think we need to find our own way of doing things in South Africa. But I hope that we can start to see cities really get those institutional shifts and political will to start to build internal capacity to sort of use smart technologies for the right reasons, sort of ethical reasons and reasons that can benefit all of society in the country.
Do you think rapid urbanization is going to slow down now from the pandemic, or do you think people will still move to the cities? Do you think cities will spread out, people will move to the suburbs now that work from home policies are also being implemented by quite a few organizations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I definitely think we'll see people wanting to continue working from home. We're actually working on like I said, the 2021 SACN report. And it's really fascinating to see population growth in the country has sort of plateaued in 2016. So the urbanization that we see is, the population that we see in cities is not because of sort of this uncontrolled growth of the population that you hear about. It's more about people actively choosing to want to live in cities. And actually, if you look at that data, the rate of growth within cities, it's in itself has reached a plateau. So since the past 3 or 4 years, we've already seen a decrease in population growth within cities. So it's a really interesting time for us and for practitioners within cities. You sort of can't carry on blaming rapid urbanization as the reason for all of our challenges. And you really need to start looking at the governance issues that we face in cities. And it's just interesting findings. And it's a good question. I mean, we could probably see an even bigger reduce in growth rates in our cities, and how that will impact them and city finances, and we'll wait to see.